Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Diary of an Invasion by Andrey Kurkov, narrated by David Aranovich.
Preface. On February 24th, 2022, I wrote hardly anything. Woken by the sound of Russian rocket explosions in Kyiv, I stood at the window of my apartment for about an hour and looked out into the empty street, aware that the war had begun, but not yet able to accept this new reality. I did not write anything for the next few days either. The car journey, first to Lviv and then on to the Carpathian Mountains, was unimaginably long due to endless traffic jams. A sea of cars from all the other regions of the country poured into the narrow funnel of roads leading to the west. Everyone was trying to escape to save their families from the outrage of war. Only when we reached Uzhhorod and had been welcomed into the home of our friends did I sit down at someone else's desk and open my computer, not to write, but to read the notes and texts that I had written over the past 2 months. I was trying to find in them a premonition of this war. I found in them much more than I expected. Ukraine has given the world many first-class chess players. Good players see the game many steps ahead. Probably Ukrainians have this ability in their genes because of the country's turbulent history and their need to foresee and plan for the future of their country and for that of their family for many years to come. A dramatic experience makes for a dramatic perception of the future. But, as if by some divine joke, in the Ukrainian national character, unlike in the Russian one, there is no fatalism. Ukrainians almost never get depressed. They are programmed for victory, for happiness, for survival in difficult circumstances, as well as for the love of life. Have you ever tried to remain optimistic during catastrophe and tragedy, during bloody military operations? I have tried and will continue to try. I am an ethnic Russian who has always lived in Kyiv. I see in my worldview, in my behavior and attitude to life, a reflection of the worldview and behavior of the Ukrainian Cossacks of the 16th century. At a time when Ukraine had not yet become part of the Russian Empire, when freedom for Ukrainians was more precious than gold. That era has returned, and freedom for Ukrainians is once again more important than gold. This war pushed me and my family out of our home. I have become one of the millions of Ukrainian displaced persons. But this same war has given me the opportunity to better understand Ukraine and my Ukrainian compatriots. I have met hundreds of people, heard hundreds of stories. I have been given insights into things about Ukraine that I did not understand before. During these tragic months, Ukrainians have learned and understood a lot about their homeland and about themselves. War is not the best time for such discoveries. But without the war, these discoveries would not have come to light. This diary consists firstly of texts that I wrote in the 2 months before the onset of the war, followed by my wartime notes and essays. It is both a private diary and my personal history of this war. This is my story. The stories of my friends, my acquaintances, and strangers. The story of my country. Taken together, this is not only a chronicle of Russian aggression in Ukraine, but a chronicle of how the war imposed by Russia and Russia's attempt to destroy Ukraine as an independent state have contributed to the strengthening of Ukrainian national identity. The war has made Ukraine more understandable to the world, more understandable and more acceptable as one of the states of Europe. 29/12/2021. Goodbye Delta, hello Omicron. Goodbye Delta, hello Omicron. this could describe the pre-New Year mood in Ukraine, and it puts us on a common trajectory with Europe and the world. Common values and enemies are the best weapons against geopolitical loneliness. But Ukraine would not be Ukraine if the New Year mood of its citizens was not enlivened with some bright and chaotic political decisions. The orchestra of state power, the cabinet of ministers, has been shooting new bills into the sky like fireworks, causing everyone to look up in amazement at the exhilarating spectacle. Ukrainians always have something to talk about, to discuss, and disagree with. When the Ministry of Defense decided to register almost all women between the ages of 18 and 60, the topic of a possible war with Russia came to life with renewed vigor and made its way into every kitchen. Apparently, this was the only way to revitalize Ukrainians' fear of war. People had already grown so tired of being afraid of it. It was frightening in 2014 when, during the annexation of Crimea, the Russian State Duma voted to allow Russian troops to fight on the territory of other states. Since then, the Ukrainian-Russian war has been going on de facto in the Donbass. Yet another proof of Russian military presence in the Donbass came to light when a fighter from there, under the influence of drugs, stumbled into the Ukrainian army positions. During interrogation by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, he complained of bullying by his Russian officers. Needless to say, the announcement by the Ministry of Defense about registering women for military service has worried Ukrainian men. And women do not like the idea either, especially since it has been clarified that both pregnant women and mothers of young children should be registered by the end of 2022. What's more, women who fail to register by then will face substantial fines. In short, far from causing a new consolidation of Ukrainian society against its enemies, this bill has provoked vigorous debate about the competence of the country's military leadership. It was probably in order to diffuse these disputes that the authorities decided to puzzle citizens yet further with another bill. It came from the Ministry of Ecology and increases the fines for damage to protected natural resources. The decree specifies the size of each fine applicable for any possible damage, including the killing of an ordinary frog, H.R. 14 per frog, picking a mushroom without permission, H.R. 75 per mushroom, the illegal collection of wild nuts, H.R. 1154 per kilogram. Defenders of the decision concerning the military registration of women base their arguments on the example of Israel, where women serve in the army on an equal basis with men. It is a pity that the defenders of protected frogs, mushrooms, and nuts have not employed similar tactics, for example, citing the mushroom police in Switzerland, who have the right to weigh a mushroom picker's harvest in the forest and to issue a fine if the harvest is greater than is allowed under Swiss law. In general, I would prefer Ukraine to follow Swiss examples rather than Israeli ones. This is what I would wish for my country for the new year. In the meantime, I look back and think, what do I want to transfer from 2021 to 2022? Yes, of course, I would like to transfer the old gas and electricity prices, but experience has taught me that the new year always brings new prices for everything. So, remaining realistic, I wish that the quality of coffee in Kyiv's coffee houses will remain the same. While not wanting a decrease in the selection of French, Italian, and Spanish wines available, I would like to see wines from Ukraine's Bessarabia and Transcarpathia continue to delight us with their taste and quality in the new year. I would also like to wish new success to Ukrainian cheesemakers and to all the small craft producers of delicious products. For Ukrainians, the taste of food is very important. Tasty food allows Ukrainians to reconcile themselves to political reality. This is our history and our mentality. As a writer, I cannot help but share a separate piece of New Year joy. A small but high-profile book lobby has persuaded the government to include books in the list of goods and services that can be bought using the H.R. 1000 handouts given to every fully vaccinated citizen of Ukraine. Some 8 million virtual bank cards with these COVID thousands have already been issued, and vaccinated Ukrainians have flocked to online bookstores to spend the money on literature. This has saved half the Ukrainian publishing houses from bankruptcy and created some new, rather pleasant problems for publishers. They urgently need to reprint books that have sold out. The only problem is a shortage of paper and a shortage of printing houses. This is both a problem and an incentive. Moreover, another H.R. 18 billion has been inserted into the 2022 state budget for COVID thousands, gifts for vaccinated Ukrainians. Soon it will be safe to say that vaccinated Ukrainians read more than unvaccinated ones. So, handouts for the vaccinated will continue into 2022, as will the wearing of masks, the war on carefully selected oligarchs, promises to protect foreign investments in QR codes, confirming our right to travel in international airspace and into restaurant premises. Let's enjoy 2022 to the full, and God bless us all. 3/1/2022. Don't mention the war. Each December 31, 10 to 15 minutes before the onset of the new year, the President congratulates Ukrainian citizens on TV. This Soviet tradition easily took root in Ukraine, like some other Soviet habits and rituals. Until 2015, many Ukrainians listened first to the congratulations of President Vladimir Putin to the Russian people at 10:50 p.m., and an hour later they listened to the Ukrainian president. After the outbreak of the war in Donbass and the annexation of Crimea, Russian TV channels in Ukraine were turned off, and with them, Putin's New Year greetings. Since then, only the Ukrainian president speaks before the New Year. True, in 2018, on one of the most popular TV channels, owned by Ukraine's principal oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, instead of the then-President Poroshenko, the Ukrainian people were congratulated by the television comedian Volodymyr Zelensky, who also announced that he was going to run for the presidency. This year, before the onset of 2022, on the channel that used to belong to the fifth president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and which now belongs to the journalists themselves, Poroshenko congratulated Ukrainians on the New Year. They then broadcast Volodymyr Zelensky's congratulations just after midnight. Zelensky's televised New Year's address lasted 21 minutes. Realizing that not everyone will have the patience to listen to the whole thing, the president's office posted the full text of the speech on its website. Largely a report on the achievements and the outstanding problems, the speech included lists of the most crucial professions in the state: the military, doctors, teachers, athletes, miners, etc. Also, obviously referring to Russia, the president expressed the wish that neighbors would come to visit with a bottle, of vodka, and jellied meat, and not barge in with weapons. This was the only mention of the war. The president did not mention the fact that, on the borders with Ukraine, Russia had assembled a huge belligerent army, along with logistic services, field hospitals, and mobile refueling bases for tanks and other equipment. But then this was common knowledge, and the possibility of a Russian military offensive against Ukraine would hardly be a popular topic of conversation at the festive table. Despite its record length, Zelensky's New Year's speech cannot be disassembled into vivid, memorable quotes. There's only one phrase with which I want to argue, or at least disagree with. We are not waiting for the world to solve our problems. Boris Yeltsin, who firmly believed that Russia and Ukraine could only exist together, once became famous for the phrase, "I woke up in the morning and asked myself, what have you done for Ukraine?" Now, it seems to me President Biden and the leaders of many European states are waking up with this same thought. President Biden has had his second telephone conversation with Putin in 2 weeks. After each such conversation, he takes several days to think it over, and only then does he call the president of Ukraine to talk about the content and results of the conversation. Croatia, meanwhile, signed a declaration on Ukraine's European perspective, and the Estonian president promised to help Ukraine with arms. Only Germany is officially opposed to the supply of weapons to Ukraine. The German Foreign Ministry said that the sale of weapons to Ukraine could increase the chances of war. In fact, a possible war between Russia and Ukraine reduces the chances of launching the Russia-Germany gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, and Germany, and probably some other Western European countries, badly want to avoid such a situation. Of course, Ukraine is not being invited to join NATO, but the weapons of NATO countries, both javelins and Turkish attack drones, are already in Ukraine and already on the front line. Both Turkey and the United States are ready to sell weapons to Ukraine. Turkey is even helping to build a plant for the production of combat drones near Kyiv. Russia does not have such drones. Immediately after the first use of Turkish attack drones, Bayraktar, against separatists in the Donbass and in response to the shelling of Ukraine by prohibited weapons, Russia started talking about Ukraine's plans to recapture the part of the Donbass seized by the separatists with the help of Western weapons. It was under this pretext that Russia began to bring tank divisions and artillery from all over its territory to the Ukrainian border. The unrecognized president of Belarus, Lukashenko, immediately announced that his army would side with Russia in the event of a Russian-Ukrainian war. This means that the front line could stretch along the entire northeastern land border of Ukraine, more than 3,000 kilometers, and this is not counting the hundreds of kilometers of the sea border along the Azov Sea, on which Russian warships could land troops. Today's front line in the Donbass is about 450 kilometers long. In the meantime, all 5,000 bomb shelters in Kyiv have been checked, as have the city's alarm sirens and the public address system for making important public announcements. But none of these actions have caused the slightest panic among the population. "We have been at war with Russia for 8 years, say some. "Putin is bluffing and blackmailing the West," others say. Both are right. But it is also true that Russia refuses to give the West guarantees of non-aggression against Ukraine. However, Kyiv remains unperturbed. Restaurants and cafes are packed. Pizza and sushi delivery couriers speed along the streets on bicycles, motor scooters, electric scooters, and even on foot. Kyivites are in a hurry to celebrate. The Golden Gate, the area of ancient Kyiv where I live, got into the list of the top 100 coolest urban areas in the world, taking 16th place. A friend of my daughter flew out from London to celebrate New Year and really liked Kyiv and its old center. On my short street, there are 4 barbers, where you can trim your beard and mustache and drink whiskey, 3 wine bars, 6 cafes, a small food court with an underground floor where you can sit with a latte in what was once a swimming pool. In the building where I live, there is a bar, an art gallery with a cafe, an art goods shop, and a school of sewing and tailoring. In the 10 days before New Year, using money from the city budget, a small, cozy public garden across the street from our house was turned into a cool, not to say cold, concrete-clad memorial park named after Pavel Sheremet. Pavel Sheremet was a Belarusian journalist who fled from Moscow to Ukraine and lived in a nearby street until he was killed on July 20, 2016, on the street where he lived. They simply attached a bomb to the underside of his car. He drove away from the house, and the car exploded. My wife and I heard this explosion. It was early on a summer morning in the third year of the war in the Donbass, which in Ukraine is called the Russian-Ukrainian War, but that explosion is the only one I have heard in Kyiv in my entire life. Remaining residents of the small town of Stanitsia Luhanska, which was partially destroyed by separatist artillery at the beginning of the war, have lived there more or less calmly since 2015, despite the fact that the entire town, in which 12,000 people lived before the war, is located right on the demarcation line, immediately beyond which is separatist-held Luhansk. And this autumn, for the first time in 6 years, shells once more fell on the roofs of civilian residences in Stanitsia Luhanska. This happened even before Russia began to send military echelons with tanks and guns to the Donbass and its borders with Ukraine. Exacerbations and local escalations in hostilities are commonplace in the Donbass, but usually the artillery of the separatists and their Russian commanders aim to destroy Ukrainian army military positions, not the dwellings of civilians. In the front-line zone, the attitude toward a possible war is not as it is in Kyiv. They know the war better, and therefore they are genuinely afraid of it. During the 2019 presidential elections, residents voted for Volodymyr Zelensky, who promised to end the war with Russia in 1 year and return stability and prosperity to Ukraine. In the third year of Volodymyr Zelensky's presidency, a big war seems much closer than before. But it would seem that the majority of Ukrainians have little fear of anything, of Russia or of COVID. Less than half of adults have been vaccinated, although vaccines have been widely available since the summer. Judging by opinion polls, Ukrainian citizens are mostly afraid of poverty. That is why more than 1 million of them have moved to live and work in Poland. Hundreds of thousands more live and work in the Czech Republic, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. Hard-working Ukrainians have even trodden a path to Denmark. Thousands of Ukrainian citizens now work on Danish farms. Millions of Ukrainians live abroad and are constantly transferring their salaries to their loved ones in Ukraine. Several times Zelensky's government has announced plans to tax these transfers. After all, we are talking about billions of euros. Half of Western Ukraine lives on money earned by relatives abroad, and apparently they live so well and so far away from daily shellings that the inhabitants of eastern Ukraine, who traditionally went to work in Russia, have also switched to Western Europe. In Russia, there are now many fewer Ukrainian guest workers than there once were. And if eastern Ukraine, a bastion of pro-Russian sentiment, has started to turn to the West, then this is another reason for Russia to be nervous. Vladimir Putin once said that the Germans invented Ukraine in 1918 in order to divide the Russian Empire, but at the end of last year, he changed his mind and said that Ukraine had been created by Vladimir Lenin. Apparently, he said this to show that Russia has more claim to Ukraine than Europe has. Ukraine, for the president of Russia, is an idée fixe, which keeps him awake at night and occupies his every waking hour. His political comrades in arms on Russian television daily suggest either bombing Kyiv or dividing Ukraine into 3 states, or seizing the entire territory, except for western Ukraine, or seizing the coastal territory from Odessa City to Transnistria. Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov proposed seizing Ukraine on his own and annexing it to Chechnya. True, he later added that he would only do this if Putin ordered him to do it. Will Putin order his troops to go on the offensive? This will become clear by early February. At least this is the time frame given by military and political experts. By then, Americans and Russians will have met 3 times and discussed the situation. the future of their relationship, and the future of Ukraine. The meetings will take place without representatives of Ukraine. "We are not waiting for the world to solve our problems," President Zelensky said in his New Year's greetings. Personally, I am waiting for that, and rather banking on it. 5/1/2022. Merry Christmas! Christmas is not white this year. It is rather grayish and, in some places, even green. At least around the town of Brusilov in Zhytomyr Oblast, where winter wheat is springing up in the fields. Still, the mood of Ukrainians is snowy and joyful. In this kind of mood, children usually go sledding or have snowball fights. In the villages, the onset of evening reveals which houses are inhabited by young families. Electric Chinese garlands, 30 or 50 meters in length, have become popular, and they light up the facades of houses in otherwise dark streets. Many homes have decorated spruce trees in their courtyards, and those who do not have evergreens have hung Christmas decorations on apple and pear trees. The festive season in Ukraine lasts 1 month, from St. Nicholas Day, December 19, to Epiphany on January 19. To celebrate for a whole month, you must have enviable health. Those whose constitutions are less robust reduce the festive period to a mere 2 weeks, from the Ukrainian Christmas to the European one, that is, from December 24 to January 7. True, for genuine believers, preparations for the Orthodox Christmas include a 40-day fast. First, you live courageously for more than a month without meat or alcohol. Then, on Holy Eve, January 6, you put 12 meatless dishes on the table and wait for the appearance of the first star in the sky. Ukrainians are not big fans of restrictions, no matter where they spring from, the church or the government. How can you fast on New Year's Eve? What about the jellied meat and Olivier salad with champagne? So, it is fair to say that Christmas is a very high peak in the mountain range of festive season celebrations rather than the main and only winter festival. At Christmas, you cannot clean the house, you cannot refuse to help if asked, and you cannot hunt or fish. Traditionally, it is the housewives who monitor the implementation of these rules, which their husbands know nothing about. And when, at the Christmas table, a usually strict housewife generously allows her husband some vodka or wine, it does not mean that she has decided to let him get drunk on Christmas Day. It is simply a way of ensuring that the thought of hunting and fishing will not even occur to anyone. There has always been a big difference between New Year and Christmas celebrations. New Year is a noisy mass holiday with fireworks and champagne. Christmas is a quiet family time. Both holidays have been victims of political repression. In 1915, Tsar Nicholas II banned celebration of the New Year, declaring it a negative German influence. The Bolsheviks, having thrown off the Tsar, allowed the holiday of the Christmas tree to re-emerge and even came up with a new name for the holiday, Krasnaya Yolka, Red Christmas Tree. It was to this Krasnaya Yolka festival that Vladimir Lenin was traveling from Moscow to see the children in the village of Sokolniki on January 6, 1919, when he and his guards were robbed by the then infamous Moscow bandit Yakov Koshelkov. Lenin was left without a Browning, money, or even a car, but he still managed to reach the children in Sokolniki. For peasant children at that time, the New Year's holiday was something exotic and foreign. Christmas was more familiar. If you noticed that Lenin was on his way to see the children on December 31, not on January 6, that is, not on the holy eve of Christmas, then it immediately becomes clear that the Bolsheviks' plan was to replace Christmas with the New Year. If in Russia, the Bolsheviks' war against Christmas and all religious holidays in general was more...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?